appreciate this.
Well, don't be too impressed. For those of you who don't know, I'm Jim Lepisto. I ran a motorcycle shop in Merriam, Kansas for a little over 30 years.
Yep.
And Mr. Justice, in his delightful, persuasive manner, invited me to do this, and kind of like jury duty, I couldn't figure out a diplomatic way to get out of it. So, here it is. I've told many stories and made up a few about how I got started doing this. Most of them were untrue. Basically, I'm self-taught. I opened my shop in '81, and within a week or two, some guy walked in and said, "You true wheels?" At that point, I had done about 6 or 8 wheels. I think 1 wheelchair and 4 or 5 bicycles. But the method was still consistent. Well, actually, that's not true. I'd also done about 6 motorcycles for Snyder's Honda dealership in Manhattan, Kansas, where I went to school. So I had a little bit of experience. So I told the guy, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. He said, well, I'm going to be gone on a trip for a couple of weeks, so I'll be back and pick them up. And I was really very grateful because I didn't have a truing stand, I didn't have any tools, and so I took his wheel almost under false pretenses. And I had a friend that had been in this business that, in fact, he had not this truing stand, but one very similar to it. These are made in Japan, in the city of Nagoya, and these are absolutely the best truing stands I have found anywhere at any price. I've had 4 of them. I have 2 currently, and I kind of turn them occasionally. A friend up in Lansing found this one somewhere and restored it and thought he owed me a favor, so he gave it to me. I was tickled silly because if you try to find one, you find one in trashy condition for $250. These really are quite good ones. They're very solid. They're all cast iron. With all that being said, truing wheels, the devil is in the details. It really is. So when I'm getting ready to, Mr. Schrader was good enough to loan me this wheel, one of his Nortons, and it looked a little scruffy when I got it. So I took it apart and I cleaned the rim, mostly soap and water, and I went into my open stock stuff that I bought back from my shop, and these are a bunch of fairly heavy-duty dirt bike spokes that I just happened to find a full set that just were absolutely the right size. So I threw a new set of spokes in here and put it all together. As you can see, it's got kind of a heavy spot in it. The rim will determine how this wheel has to be laced, and so everything is laid down on a table. In this instance of this, the hub and the rim share a common center line. So laying on its side, I've raised the hub up. Actually, I have it set it up on a little tube stand so I can put all the spokes through the holes coming up and going down, and then spread them with my hands and set them down on the table for work surface. The rim I will look at, and it will tell me which direction each spoke goes. The holes on opposite sides of this rim are not even from each other, but they're half a hole offset. And so when they're done that way, then the spokes, as they progress around the rim, also follow that half a spoke offset. So these two are sequential on the hub, and they're sequential on the rim. The one thing we have to be careful of when you run into spokes is stainless steel is a special case on rims like this. Now, those aren't stainless steel because the magnet sticks right to it. Most stainless steel, it won't. Some, they're slightly sensitive, but they won't stick like that. They have to have a special lubricant, or if you put a stainless nipple on a stainless spoke, the great unwashed will call that galling. Basically what it is friction welding. And it will weld so hard, if it's done without lubricant, that if you try to take the nipple off, you'll break the spoke. They are that strong. So you need a special lubricant. Buchanan is one of the really good suppliers of spokes like this, and when they send you a set of ordered spokes, it'll have a little small tube of this black looking goo that you put a little dab on each one of the threads prior to assembly, and it avoids any frictional problems. Some spoke manufacturers don't send that lube with them, and so we have to know this and figure out what it is that we need, and the stuff is right on your shelf. If you have some hypoid up on the shelf for the differential in your car or your pickup truck, that's all it is. Hypoid has a lot of phosphorus and sulfur in it, and it gives you great lubricity. And so then when you start pulling friction, you're not getting friction, but you're getting true torque, and you can get good tensions on your spokes. And to find out how much tension you have on your spokes, it's easy enough. You should be able to hit them with something, and like a violin or a piano string, they'll ring. Now this one has just been assembled, and just the slack has been taken out, so nothing here is tight. And that proves it. This is guaranteed failure if you try to use it. So at this point then, it's surprising how straight this is, because as I began to assemble it, the first thing I did was just started the nipples on so everything is assembled. Then it's guesswork. I'll try to run the nipples in and leave a little bit of thread showing, and I'll pick the rim up. If it's still a little bit loosey-goosey, then I can run the nipples in just a little bit farther. What I'm trying to do is find where I'm bringing them very even all the way around, evenly, until everything is just nominally snug. I can't turn them with my fingers, but it's just at that point. And doing it that way, you can see how initially straight that I am, and it minimizes the work that I have to do to finally true this wheel. As you begin taking the slack up in the nipples, usually I start with, these are just slotted on the inside edge, and just a cheap little screwdriver is all you really need to start the process. I'm usually not this careless. And once you've got tension on all your nipples, then these things come into play. Buchanan happens to sell these. I think they're about $15, $18 a piece now. They're not done in fractions. These are done in thousands. So this one is a 210, 250. Harley wheels use 234s. Indians use 330s, really big ones. So then, as you begin to start developing tension on these, everything I've ever read or understood is the first thing you try to eliminate is radial runout, because you want this thing concentric with the center of the hub. And then once that's achieved, even though it's not full tight at all, then you take out lateral error, then you go back and check radial runout, and you come back and check lateral error until you start satisfying yourself that you are now starting to approach a proper tension on your spokes. And to find that, as long as they're not touching each other, which in this instance they aren't, you can use that same screwdriver or a truing wrench and just bang the spokes, and you're trying to get music out of them. Just like a violin or a guitar string. When they start getting tight, they start having a harmonic. And somebody said, well, you want them to all sound the same. No, you don't want them all the same. because the wheel may not be round. So where there's little bits of error and you need to pull those in a little bit more tension, the tone on that particular spoke is going to be a little higher, but they still all have to have good music on them. Once you've satisfied yourself to that, it's time to call your customer and reach for his wallet.
So is it possible to get them too tight?
Oh, absolutely.
And what does that sound like? Just too high
They
pitched?
break.
Okay.
I've not had anything like that happen. And as you're doing the truing process in here, it's not just a case of just tighten. You may develop an area, and usually I'll either use little tape strips that I need to work in. This area was too far out, so I need to get my wrench in here and tighten these spokes between here and here to bring that in compliance with the rest of the wheel. Now, once you've had several episodes of this around the wheel, you'll notice that there's one spot in the wheel over here that it continues to be too far in. It's okay to come back and loosen these things like a quarter or a half a turn to let that part relax a little bit, and the pressure from the rest of the wheel will push that out.
So a lot of us aren't starting with like new rims. A lot of us are starting with kind of junk. Some of us are starting with junk anyway.
Well,
so how far?
Yours isn't new, and this one wasn't either.
Right. So how much untrueness from a rim can you get out?
It's pretty easy to take out a 16th. Much beyond that, you're starting to crowd it pretty hard. Sometimes you have to finally just admit to yourself that this rim really needs to be replaced. And unfortunately, sometimes that is the answer. I'd always prefer to work on an alloy rim than a steel rim. They're just more elastic. They're easier to adjust. They're more flexible. You can do much more with them. But these two will true just fine. Although, if we have an out of weight or out of balance condition, it might be here in the hub. So there's nothing you can do about that. Just warn your customer or make a mark on it that I'll draw on the inside here, and I'll put light spot, or down on the bottom side, heavy spot. So when they get ready to put the tire on, they can use the offset heavy spot in the tire to offset the heavy spot in the rim to start eliminating, or at least offsetting, some of the natural balance.
Couldn't they all just be torqued to the same amount?
Well, I've had people say, well, don't you use a torque wrench? Well, yeah, it's right here. and after a while, you learn. If you start pulling and it starts to hurt, you're pulling too hard.
You said you took the radial run out first and then do the lateral. Do you have like a better technique to make sure you're not adjusting, you're not setting the radial out while you're trying to get the lateral right?
You may have the rim drifting one way or another. I didn't point out, but on the inside here, there's a pointer, just a sharpened spoke, and it rides in here. And when I'm checking to see how far out this is, and if it laterally or radially, I'm using the tip of this thing to leave a little air gap against the inside of the rim. I don't care what it looks like out here on the sides or in here where you can see when the tire's on it. If this surface inside is true and straight, the tire will run true and straight. And beyond that, we don't care what it looks like. Well, we do, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. If you've got radial run out, do you say it like that? Can you,
Hopefully
you
it's not that
loosen up
much.
one side? You loosen up one side and
Sure,
tighten the opposite?
depending on how much it is. You know, if we're talking, 6 or 7 thousandths, then we might be able to pull it in. But if you see you've done some pulling and it's still not moving, you might check some more of the rim and see if you do have a spot that's a little bit too far in. It's giving you a wider gap with your pointer in here, you can reach into that section, you know, here, where do we go? From here to here, and loosen those, and then come back here and check this, and you think, it's gotten better. And you actually, as you're doing this, you start seeing this thing move. Because the rim just becomes alive. It will go, you can just push it anywhere you want it.
You can't.
But the devil's in the details.
Mine are
You
all
really
dead.
want to pay attention.
Jim, how many wheels have you shoot?
Oh, good, I loaded it. I made him ask this question. To date, I've got a little over 23,000 wheels.
That's a
Jim,
Honest, no honest, I was.
I was told one time to test the tightness on the spokes that are on my bike is to hit them with a wrench and listen to them.
Sure.
To see if there's is that a acceptable?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Practice.
Just, you know, the bike's up on the stand, the wheel's free to turn, just get out here and get something, and then as you're playing with it, you know, something that'll just, and then go the other way. Here, you can almost start to hear it. They're all pretty dead, but they're starting to vibrate a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
Jim, you haven't talked about weights,
I never balance a wheel until you put a tire on it.
but then you use the weights.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you use the spoke weights or the stick-on weights?
I always prefer, and in my shop, I always had weights that I pressed on over the nipples. My last course, if nothing else would work, I'd use tape weights. But they always to me look kind of trashy.
My old Indian uses lead weight wire.
Well,
Better wire.
that's before you had guys with shops that would spend the money and get really nice weights. Some of those 1 ounce weights, they're 40 cents a piece. So anytime I had wheels come in and somebody wanted a new tire put on, if it had weights on it, I pulled them off and kept them. Because they would, you know, clean them up a little bit, they get recycled, and they were going to provide something good for someone else.
What's your opinion of weighted beads in the tire?
That's bullshit.
How do you feel about that?
There's the
Okay, let's think about the physics of this. Where are those beads going to go? They're not going to go to the lightest spot in the wheel. They're going to go to the spot furthest from the center. It's just physics. And at 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, it probably really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But 1 ounce at 100 miles an hour is like putting a 9-pound weight on this thing and turning it loose. It'll just hammer a motorcycle suspension to pieces. It's just some shill has figured out a way to steal money from people.
Jim, is the spoke orientation different for the rear wheel and depending on the rotation direction?
If you look at this wheel, there are outside spokes that come through and come from the outside and up to the rim. And then there are spokes that come from the inside of these flanges, and they come together. When I drew one of these wheels, I asked Tom, this Norton is a left side drive. So this wheel turns this way when it's driven. The insides, oh, there's one that's pretty loose. These inside spokes have a shorter neck and less than 90 degrees of bend. These are known as outside spokes. They have more than a 90-degree bend and they have a longer neck. These inside ones are stronger. And so when I designed my lace pattern, I put these on the inside. This wheel turns this way, and these are the pulling spokes, the strongest ones. They're on the inside. And these on the outside are the following spokes. They just help keep tension on the wheel. So I've done something else to improve just the random strength of this particular wheel.
Thanks, Steve, had a question?
Yeah, what kind of tolerance I mean, how close do you try to get the wheel through? Best you can get it, or?
I've had somebody say, oh, well, you've got to use a dial indicator on that. That's bullshit. There's just enough corrosion on this wheel. I defy somebody to try to use a dial indicator on it. With this little sharpened spoke that I have here, and I have a nice white background here, so light, and I'm watching from here. I've got an air gap that's probably 5-6 thousandths. If I have a really clean chrome rim, it will even give me a reflection of that tip. And so now my error is double, the error and the reflected error. So instead of this, I'm looking at this. And so as I start playing it, you start seeing that error start to diminish. And I probably get them down to 1 or 2 thousandths. I defy a tire manufacturer to hold tolerances that close. So what little imperfection is there is negligible. Yes, sir.
So I brought you a wheel one time. It was a British wheel. And of course you had a big brake drum on one side, and then on the other side you had a little bitty hub.
Yeah, he's got one of those too. They're known as conicals.
So I did a great job of that. I borrowed another guy's wheel and put it there, and I spoked it all up, and I brought it over, and you looked at it and you said, "Hey, you got that all wrong." I couldn't even copy it. But anyway, the point I was going to make is as soon as you go to those inside and outside spokes, the angle is different. So you get different, in other words, when you got a wheel like that, you got one set of spokes that's going to have one set of angles, and the inside's going to have, well, you probably got 4 different angles, because you got the inside and the outside.
In this case, there's only 2.
Yeah.
All of it, and because this is a dimensionally equivalent rim, they're the same on both sides, and a center line on the hub, and a center line on the rim. So all the inside spokes are the same length with the same bend, and the outside spokes are the same length with slightly more than 90 degree. The insides are slightly less than 90 degree.
So when you've got a big hub on one side and a little one on the other, now you got 4 different.
Now you have 4.
4 different. So you
And
got to
it's
be
known
careful.
as a conical wheel,
Right.
or a conical hub, because the 2 sides form a visual cone. He's got one of these on one of its Indian.
Oh no, it's a
No, it's a James
28 JD.
JD.
Harley.
It's the first Harley to have a front brake was a half drum, and one side's a hub like this, and the other side's a hub like this. So you have to have a rim that's designed for that too. The rim has to have holes drilled like this for the big side, and like this for the small side.
So I'll just use mine as an example because that's really what I want to know. So,
There's nothing wrong with that.
my wheel is an 18-inch wheel, and I'm trying to go to a 20-inch diameter.
You need
wheel.
longer spokes.
Right. So my point is can I just add an inch to the length of the spoke?
No.
So how would you go about calculating spoke length? Is the question.
You can eyeball it by simply laying the hub down and figuring out where in relation rotationally that thing has to sit to be a perfect match for that hub. And then you can measure it.
I see.
If you know which hole goes to which hole. If you don't, fortunately, Buchanan has seen these before, and you tell them what you have, and with the proper application of money, they'll send you the right ones. Or when you take a wheel apart, keep them, make notes. Everybody's been looking at that book. In fact, I bought this is 35 years of accumulated knowledge and pictures and this and that, and I brought it for whoever would like to see it. And there's a few photographs in there of stuff that I've encountered. There's on the front there's a penny farthing. It's one of those bicycles with a big front wheel and a little back wheel. We built a wheel for it, and some of the screw-ups that was on the original wheel, they used what was known as a radial pattern on that bike, where the spokes went directly from rim to hub, just absolutely straight all the way around.
Oh my God.
If you do it that way, it's inherently unstable. I absolutely refuse to put together a wheel that's one of those patterns. It's got to be a crisscross pattern in order to have any natural stability to it.
So would you say that the more that the spoke crosses, so the amount of crosses that the spoke goes over another cross, so like a 2 cross or a 3 cross, right?
Yeah,
Does it get stronger as you get more crosses?
I think up to a point, what we're really trying to find, aside from the natural stability, is if you have an angular pull on the spoke, you're trying to pull the spoke through more metal on the hole, so it also is anchored better in the hub. But by crossing 2 across, 3 across, 4 across, I've done 80 spoke wheels where they're 8 across. You know, you have so many spokes in there, you're almost starting to trip.
Does that change your angle of your, if you go from one size rim to the other using the same hub, doesn't that change your rim, the location?
The rim has to be drilled where the spokes for the big side, the spokes come out at an angle like this.
Right.
And on the small side, the spokes come at a real shallow angle. So the rim has to be drilled like this and like this.
So I was asking on
And
Tom's
his
in
was.
particular.
Last meeting, we were out here in the front playing with some of his rims, and I've seen enough of them. I said, "Oh, this is your conical right here." I'm not sure at first when he believed me, but then I showed him what it was, and he was, "Okay, yeah, okay."
So you just can't really go from like a 16-inch rim to an 18 and just change spokes, because that's going to change the angle in your rim, doesn't it?
Most of the time, it makes a difference. Yes.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Will a properly designed spoked wheel be stronger and more flexible than a mag wheel potentially?
Yes, but the spoke wheel can possibly eventually over time come loose, where the mag wheel probably won't. Let's hope it doesn't. Yes.
On the back of Tom's calculation question, are spokes sold in specific incremental lengths, or is it based on like, you have this hub and this rim, you get this, you get this hub?
I had the occasion to try to build 10 wheels for EAA 292, that's Experimental Aircraft Association, and it's an FAA sanctioned club in Independence, Oregon. They were building 5 World War I replica fighter planes, and somehow through a long process, I wound up with the contract. They went down to Lathe and built the hubs, and they asked me if I would build them a set of 21-inch wheels for these airplanes using these hubs. So I found the rims, basically 21-inch steel rims for Harleys or several others, but they were 40 holes, so that made that easier. And at first they thought, well, would alloy rims be lighter? I said, yeah, they'd probably be maybe 4 or 5 ounces to a half a pound lighter a piece, but they'd be 4 times more expensive. I thought, well, let's go with the steel ones. So at that point, then, I sat down and, much as I explained, by putting the hub down and the rim, and I figured out my 4-cross lace pattern, which I elected to do, I had Buchanan build the 10 sets of spokes. And when I got all done and shipped them off, that was the first profitable November I ever had. I just wound up in a shoebox full of money over that. But it worked out well, and there's a couple of those airplanes that are now fine.
On new wheels, have you worked on new wheels that you found to be off by very much? How are new wheels when you get them on a new bike?
Most of the time, they're just borderline perfect.
Okay.
The worst of the Chinese.
Jim, Mark had a question.
Is there such thing as spoke stretching?
They are, like anything, they are somewhat elastic. Now, we're not talking about a rubber band. And if you measure them, we may stretch that thing maybe 3/4 of a thousandth. And under tension, you're getting some of that. So Yeah, there is some elasticity.
When you spoke a wheel, you always use the same spokes. In other words, new spokes. You don't mix old and new.
Doesn't make a difference, as long as they're good material.
I mean, couldn't you have a lower quality, newer spoke that might stretch more than an old spoke?
No, I don't think so. Not that I've ever encountered, not that I've ever noticed.
Hey Jim, how do you use your little pointer for measuring the lateral run out
Well,
on the inside there?
the radial is
Right.
this part, but the lateral is this part.
Against the shoulder?
On the inside of the flange or on the inside of the shoulder. So I'll move my pointer to the side,
Yeah.
either here or here. Both sides.
Gotcha.
That's it.
Any other questions?